back once again, folks, to our study in Paul's epistle to the church at Rome, where he is laying out not only his systematic gospel, step by step, layer by layer, as a legal case, as I've been proposing, but as I reflect on and reread passages, and so that I can make sure that I am consistent and I'm laying this out in the same manner that Paul has written it. I realize that Paul is also laying out his heart and his hope and his just desire that we all come along with him, not only to know the mechanics of the gospel, the moving parts of the mechanism by which God has orchestrated this so great a salvation. That in and of itself is mind blowing. But there's another element, there's another layer that is just as important, and that is to write it upon our hearts and take it from our mind and bring it so that it moves our entire being. And as we take a step back and we contemplate these things that Paul is laying out for us in this incredible book of Romans, we're just blown away by this plan of salvation. And we approach it with hopefully humility to say, Lord, guide me and direct me along this path that you have laid out, knowing that it's not by our natural abilities that we'll ever be able to accomplish the things that have been assigned to us, but it's only by a contrite, humble heart following the Lord and asking each and every day, Lord, what would you have me do to this day? Lead me in your path. And along those lines, I was thinking about some words that Jesus said in John chapter 4. But an hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And that got me thinking about, he says, the true worshipers of God. What does that indicate? That there are false worshipers of God. Yes, they're worshiping, like when Jesus says, these people, they worship me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me. They are worshiping, but they're false. They're not true worshipers of God. So, what is the requirement to be a true worshiper of God? Because many will be deceived because they're worshiping, but they end up being false worshipers of God. And so, what he says is the true worshipers of God will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, we need to know these mechanisms. We need to know these theological components, these bricks that we've been laying out. But these need to be translated to a heart that is yearning for and just diligently seeking to serve the Lord in the manner that he has prescribed. And then he says, for such people, true worshipers, the Father seeks to be his worshiper. The Father is seeking, which tells us they're not plentiful, they're not apparent, they're not just flowing in. He's looking in this valley and behind this door, or however it plays out. The Father has to induce seeking in order to find true worshipers who will worship him both in spirit and in truth. And many worship him in truth because they have all their theological ducks in a row, maybe, but they don't translate that to a compassion for people. And there's a lot of churches and organizations that just go, as long as you believe in Jesus, it's fine. And just tell everybody that Jesus loves them and just like, let's just love one another. And you can't do that without following the instructions that are laid out in the Word of God. So you need both. And that's what I'm attempting to live myself and attempting to pass on to you folks. So let's pick it up in Romans chapter 8, as we have been, in verse 24. And it says, in hope we have been saved, but a hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes in what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it. And we remember that Jesus is like thy kingdom come. He is with perseverance waiting for this hope. Jesus shares the hope that Paul is telling us to embrace as well. And as we look at this hope, we're reminded, of course, for Hebrews chapter 11, where it says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. I was a sales manager, sales guy for many years, and we used to have this saying when people say, well, are you going to bring this deal in this month? And people say, well, I hope so. And we used to say, hope is not a strategy. But this is a different type of hope that I hope this will occur. This is a hope based on something that we know is true and reliable and we can count on. We can take it to the bank, right? Remember in Romans chapter 4 when Abraham contemplated his own body as good as dead and the deadness of Sarah's woman, but it says, yet he did not waver in unbelief, but grew strong, knowing that what God had promised, he was able to accomplish. And that's the same hope that we have. We hope in somebody who is can't be unreliable, whose word is his bond, and his bond is pure gold. And what should this hope translate to? This hope should translate to, as I said, about that we live right now in this little bubble called Earth and called this life. And all it is really preparation for being equipped to serve Christ in eternity. And that's where we have to set our mind. We don't get involved with the ramblings, especially in light of the current political situation where evidence and facts and reason and consideration of any other's opinions has been completely thrown out the window. And it's just this aggressive fight. And we rise above it because Christ said, when Pilate said, you're a king, and Jesus says, yes, you say correctly that I'm a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would be fighting for it. Where's your kingdom? And that's a big question to contemplate. Are you wrapped up in what you see around you, or are you able to ascend to the hope, the calling, the promise of the one who will never fail in his promise? And if you are, you will be like those in Hebrews chapter 11. But as it is, they desire a better country. I want something better than this. I look around at the politics and what goes on in this world, and I'm there like, there's got to be something better than this. And you've all asked yourself that question from time to time, I'm sure. They desire a better country. That is a heavenly one, a future one. Therefore, because their minds are set on the hope that God has promised, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so there's this whole other realm that we cannot see, but we place all our eggs in that basket. You know, the old saying, don't place all your eggs in one basket. Well, this is a basket in which you can confidently place all your eggs in. As we continue in verse 26, in the same way, the Spirit also helps our weakness. We are weak. We are not equipped to do this on our own. The expectation isn't that we're going to just take this and run with it. For we don't even know how to pray as we should, right? But the Spirit Himself intercedes with us for with groanings too deep for words, and He who searches the hearts and knows the mind of the Spirit is because He intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. We're weak, so weak. We're like little children. We don't even know how to pray as we should. So we start in prayer and say, oh Lord, intercede with us with groanings too deep for words in this, not even in the realm we understand, in some spiritual mystery where the Spirit is interceding and communicating with the eternal God on our behalf. And that's just an incredible thing to be able to count on and contemplate and rely upon as we walk this earth and as we walk in this life, right? And then we come on to the great Romans 8:28. I'd say in the top 10 or 15 at least of often quoted and misquoted verses in the Bible. Romans 8:28. You're all familiar with it. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And we say, look at that. Everything's going to turn out just fine if we just have faith, if we just continue. And we have all kinds of these preachers, these prosperity preachers that use this verse as their centerpiece to say just those things. If you just have faith, things are going to go well for you. Is that what this verse is telling us? And I'm going to just look to as an example. It's so important to have a good and proper translation. As I've said to you many times, I have the NASB in front of me as I study. It's generally considered to be the most accurate English translation. And I know a lot of King James people might argue with me. I don't want to get into that argument right now because I have King James right next to me, and I use that to cross-reference as I study. And then on the other side, I have the Amplified Bible, a literal word-for-word Hebrew and Greek translation, so that I can cross-reference these things and be able to get an accurate picture of what the Spirit of God has inspired and instilled these men to write down. And if we compare this New American Standard, it says that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God. And we compare it, say, with the New International Version or NIV. And what we jokingly refer to the NIV as the non-inspired verse. But there's a lot of truth to that joke, because it's not really a joke, because if you're following along in the NIV, here is one example where it's going to take you in the wrong direction. And once you get into this wrong direction, this wrong mindset, all these other things that are important to keep us on the narrow way will be skewed. Romans 8:28 in the NIV. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. So it's not good to those, but it's good for those, right? It's a little word, but it's a huge difference. And so we ask ourselves, as we look at these examples, did it work for the good of Stephen, who was stoned in Acts chapter 7? How about Paul, who was beheaded in Rome? Or John Bunyan, who spent 13 years in prison for preaching without a license and left his family probably pretty close to destitute, 4 kids and a young wife, while he said, no, I have to be faithful to the calling that God has laid before me. And in more recent times, how about the Nigerian martyrs that we just read about in the news? These people were faithful, but it didn't work together for their good as far as we can say that their benefit or their prosperity or their well-being did it. No, they were martyred. And we go down throughout history with all the prophets, the apostles, Fox's Book of Martyrs, all the way down throughout history, and it will come again, as we know. But it's not going to work so well for our good. But if too good, Stephen, we still talk about Stephen 2,000 years later as an example of he who was steadfast and wouldn't relent in the face of death. And Jesus appeared to Stephen. He says, behold, I see Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And obviously we're studying Paul's book to the Romans right now, even though the end of his life was not so something that you'd want for yourself. And we go down the list. And so this verse, Romans 8:28, is saying that God has a predetermined plan. And for us to be a part, even the smallest part of the God working out his plan of salvation and redemption and restoration of eternity. How great a privilege is that? And then we come to what is popularly known as the golden chain of redemption. And very bright people and very studied and learned people, far more than I think of Dr. James White. Boy, he presents his case of what we're going to call, and I don't want to get into a debate about Calvinism versus Arminianism, but he would contend that, yes, he is a staunch Calvinist. And he uses this Romans 8, 28, 29, and 30 as probably the central focus, the centerpiece of what he believes as far as the sovereignty of God. And so this is one of these areas where we're going to focus on truth and the mechanisms of the gospel as it's laid out in the scriptures, but we're not going to forego the implications of the Spirit and why it's important and how it should be applied to our lives. So let's go take a look at it. Here's our verse. And I know that this is going to probably stir up a little controversy. That's okay as long as we approach this in a respectful manner. I'm happy to work through this with any of you who are listening. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. And these whom he predestined, he also called. And these who he called, he also justified. And these whom he justified, he also glorified. So the question that is being raised from this is, does man choose or does God sovereignly elect? And the answer is yes. So let's dive into that and explain this. Okay, so as we take a deep dive and examine what these passages are going to be saying, in light of the controversy that is stirred up around all of these verses, I would just ask that we just take a step back, that we take a deep breath, and we say, okay, what is Paul really saying here? And hopefully, as you've been studying along with me from beginning to end sequentially, you're going to see that this is just a natural outcome of the case that he is making. And it's not just pull it out of the blue discussion that we're going to have on this system versus this system, and we're not going to have to force ourselves to fall into that trap, hopefully. And I know that this is emotionally charged because it raises a deep-seated, heartfelt issue of God's sovereignty versus man's choice. And I think maybe, hopefully, we've laid really out one of the primary pieces of the groundwork as we studied Romans 1 through 3. And this is just going to build on that. And so I would ask that this not turn into an academic food fight, that we're not here to defend a system, that when we do, we see the Calvinists entrenched and the Arminians entrenched, and no one repents, no one worships, no one's won over to the other side ever. And whole careers are made on these debates and these YouTube channels that go down the list of 10 YouTubes describing why Romans 9 really doesn't mean this, or this golden chain of redemption really is solid and really means this. And we see that in these discussions that pride and the flesh are really the winners, and therefore the winner really is the one who is the corrupter, the deceiver is really the winner. And I hope we can approach this in a very different manner and take it step by step, not jumping to any conclusions, but just allowing Paul to lay this out. Okay, so let's put on the helmet of salvation and our breastplate of righteousness. And equipped with those things, let's see if we can figure out exactly what Paul is telling us here. So I'm going to reread the passage. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. And these whom he predestined, he also called, and these whom he called, he also justified. And these whom he justified, he also glorified. So let's break it down step by step. We see that this, what's called the golden chain of redemption, goes from one truth to another, to another, to another, ending in glorification. So is it just automatic, or are there things that we need to consider above just a cause and effect and an automatic glorification of anybody who God has foreknown? So let's examine foreknowledge. And the question that arises is some will explain that foreknowledge means that God looks down through the quarters of time and he knows what a person will choose, whether they'll choose God or they'll choose not to follow God. And based on that knowledge, that God will predestine that person to participate in this chain leading to glorification. And others would propose that no, this is not about foreseeing. Foreknowledge is an intimate relationship with a person, that those who he foreknew are those that he has purpose to set his love upon, and not just a omniscient seeing of what they would or wouldn't or what they might do. So let's go to the scriptures and see if we can get some insight into which one of these most accurately reflected by the scriptures themselves. If we look at Amos 3:2, it says, talking about the nation of Israel here, he says, "You only have I known among all the families of the earth. Therefore, I will punish you for all of your iniquities." Not the most pleasant thing to be told, but I think it gives us some insight here. So when Amos says about Israel, "You only have I known amongst all the families of the earth," is he saying that God didn't foresee or didn't know about Babylon or Assyria or Egypt? Or is he saying, I've only known you personally, intimately. I've had this relationship. I have this knowledge of you, this intimate knowledge of you. It's not a foreseeing who you are or what you'll do, but it's something I've known. It's a nation I know, I'm intimate with, right? That would be the logical explanation of this. When Jesus is talking about judging people, he says, "And then I will declare to them, I never knew you." Is he saying, I never knew what you would do? I didn't have the foresight to understand what you would choose, and therefore it's too bad for you because I was just unaware of what you might do. I wasn't able to see how you would respond to my call for your gospel. No, I don't think that's indicating this at all. I never knew you. I never knew who you were. I never had a relationship. I was never intimately acquainted with you, right? I mean, that can really be the only explanation of "I never knew you." Jesus isn't saying I was totally unaware of your existence or who you were or what you would do or how you would act, right? In John chapter 10, he says, "I know my own, and my own knows me, just as the Father knows me." Well, this is really getting a lot more clear now, right? I know my own. That's it. Well, Jesus only knew what his own would do. He didn't know about anything else anybody else would do. And then he says, "And my own know me, just as the Father knows me." And we know that Jesus and the Father had this, to call it intimate doesn't even be able to describe it. They are one with each other. Philip, if you had seen me, you would know the Father, right? There it is again, that word. You'd know that we are one. So it's not about the Father looking down the corridors of time after Jesus was born, going, I hope he goes to the cross. Let's see what he'll do, whether he'll turn away or he'll accept this calling that I've given him. And then First Corinthians says, but if anyone loves God, he is known by God. And again, it's the same thing, right? It's not about restricting God's knowledge about who a person is or what he does to the fact that they love him. He knows everything about everybody and he orchestrates everything in a predetermined plan, right? Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And he tells this about Jeremiah. Did he not know anybody else? Was Jeremiah unique in this? Yes, he was unique, not because God didn't know about and everybody else. He says the very hairs on your head are numbered. Some of us, it's easier to number, little inside joke there, than others. However, by the same token, he knows us intimately, and he says about Jeremiah, before you were even formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. And so, as we studied Romans 1, Romans 2, and Romans 3, and if you haven't been following along, please, I highly recommend you go back and you work through those, and maybe you work through those for a second or a third time. And I'm not just trying to push my product. It just has taken me time after time after time to get these things ordered and straight in my head. These are complex things, but they're important things, and they'll allow you to just move forward into a deeper relationship with God as you gain a deeper understanding of what He has laid out. We've seen that in Romans 1 and 2 leads up to Romans 3, where the conclusion of both Jews and Gentiles are all fall under the same condemnation, that by the works of the law, or that by conscience or creation, or whatever any revelation that has been bestowed on man, he turns away every time. And we see that with the flood, that God looks over what all men, and he sees that every intention of the heart was only evil continually. He didn't see any bright spots. He didn't say, as I look upon the man, there are very few men who are righteous here. No, he said, of all men, every intention of the heart is only evil continually. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us very clearly the conclusion of all of this evidence that Paul spends, a chapter and a half laying out is there's none righteous. Wait a minute, Paul. Come on, there's got to be one righteous. And then he emphasizes it. Not even one. There is none who understands. There's none who seeks for God. How many have turned aside? Most have turned aside. All but a few have turned aside. That's not what he says. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is none that has done good. Not even one. And so we see that the foreknowledge of God, knowing us, he knew me in my mother's womb. If you have come to Christ and are walking by his Spirit, he knew you in his mother's womb. He didn't look down and say, I wonder what Herb will do when he is confronted with the gospel. He knew, he preordained that I would come to him. Now, I know that's tough for people to understand. And they say that's not fair. And we're going to see that as we get into Romans chapter 9, because that is the exact reaction that the antagonist, the theoretical antagonist that Paul is laying out all these verses is the conclusion that he comes to. And Paul answers that as well. So if that is how you're feeling right now, I would just ask, I'd beg, I respectively petition you to just let's take some time. Let's take a step back and see how these things unfold. Okay. Because we're going to see that just like with the gospel of human achievement versus the gospel of divine accomplishment, if you're following along, you know what those things are. Those are the two things that are offered in religion today, let's just say. And neither one of them we're discovering are correct. And there's a third option. And so if you're going, I'm not a Calvinist, I'm an Arminianist, or vice versa, I'm here to say to you that I don't think either of these systems represent what Paul is laying out here in Romans, and there is a third option. So if you'll be patient with me, I'm going to try to do my best by the Spirit, by following Him, asking the Lord to put His words in my mouth, to be able to open the hearts that God has preordained to want to be opened by this to ring true. So, as we continue on in this very important passage that Paul is laying out here, it's important not only because it really sets the tone for what is to come, but because it is so misunderstood, so argued about, so contentious. I've decided to call an audible. And for you football guys out there, you know exactly what I mean, that I'm going to just interrupt this program to bring about an important message. And I'm going to introduce what has been known as a cliffhanger. And we're going to pick it up next time because I don't want to just pour all this stuff out and just lay it there. I hope and pray that you will just contemplate these things slowly and methodically, that you'll place them before the Lord and say, Lord, you show me because you are the author of truth. And I'm here to pursue truth. And no matter where that truth leads me, that is where I want to go. So I'm gonna put this in a part one and then pick it up in a part two. And as always, I just pray that that the Lord would put these words in my mouth and that He would open hearts through these words. And I would ask that you pray for me as well. And I hope you are. If you are, just let me know. Give me a quick comment. Herb, I'm praying for you, man. I appreciate what you're doing. That is just really helpful to me and encouraging to me. And if you have a question or a discussion or a disagreement, I'm more than happy. As those of you who have posted questions or asked me things, you know, I am eager and willing to engage in a respectful manner, so that we can all get closer to the spirit of truth. And so, with that, God bless you all, and may the Lord just open your minds and hearts to know Him more fully, so that we might be able to serve Him more diligently.